Thank you for listening to the Bladder Battle Podcast on this new special series called Flarey Tales. So this series is meant to give inspirational warriors with bladder conditions such as interstitial cystitis a chance to share their personal journey. This series is also intended to bring awareness and create conversation in a safe space for those with this illness. But please note, this podcast is not intended to be a medical alternative for physician care, nor to treat, cure, or prevent any illness or disease. So please always consult with your physician for professional medical advice. So today we are talking all about the differences between the United States and the United Kingdom when it comes to treatments and breakthrough care for interstitial cystitis. So we are going across the pond here to the United Kingdom, and we are going to introduce Suzy Hutchins. She is an IC warrior, so she's going to share her personal story today and kind of what she's been going through. So Suzy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Lauren. It's good to be here.
Yes. Very excited to kind of hear about what you are going through and your opinions on the medical system, kind of the differences on what you've experienced versus what I've experienced over here in the U.S. But before we get into that, why don't you share just a little bit of information about yourself? So like, what do you do for a living? Obviously, we know you're from the UK, but where specifically? And, you know, just a little bit more about you as a person.
Yeah, sure. So I am 44 years old. I'm a mum of a 12-year-old boy. We live near Oxford, between Oxford and London. And I teach mindfulness in schools. I was a primary school teacher many years ago, and then I left that and went into the corporate world for a long time, doing something completely different. And then I went back to the classroom 5 years ago now. I'm just actually this year consulting for Legoland on an education and wellbeing project. So that's kept me really busy during lockdown since March. So I spend a lot of my time either in school or helping organizations with their educational programs. Wow.
Well, that's very rewarding. And, you know, it definitely, you're probably out and about and on your feet a lot.
Yes, I was. I was before COVID times.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. So let's get into a little bit about your, personal journey with IC. So when did it begin, and when did you finally get an official diagnosis?
So I guess it's 5 years ago. It'll be 6 years this January. And I went to my GP with the symptoms of a UTI, and over here, they do something called a dip test, where you give them a fresh sample of urine, and they have a piece of paper that they dip into it that shows various different things that they look for that are infection markers. It's well known here that sadly our dip tests usually miss around 50% of all infections. And in this case, so it's a really high rate. And at the time, I think there was such a lack of awareness in terms of treating people's symptoms. They were only really looking at the dip test, and they sent me away despite having all the regular symptoms, the urethral burning, the pain, the frequency, the urgency, all those things that a UTI would look like. And I then went off and suffered for the next week or so and ended up on a trip to visit my parents near Cheltenham. And when I arrived, things got much worse. I ended up in the evening really, really unwell and collapsing. And my mum took me to the A&E, which I think is what you call the ER room.
Yes.
And they finally diagnosed me with a UTI. They gave me a week's worth of antibiotics, and it went away. That was sort of August time. It came back again in the October. They did the same thing. They gave me another week's course of antibiotics, and off I went. It came back again in December. They did the same thing. Then by January, it came back and it didn't go away. And in fact, I think this was the best moment I had was when I was with my GP discussing that the antibiotics clearly weren't working. And she said to me, maybe you've just burnt yourself on a hot bath. Which was an interesting take on it. And I asked her even then, because I'd done some, as you do when you're unwell and there are no answers, you tend to go to Google And interstitial cystitis kept coming up, and I kept reading and thinking, yes, it sounds like what I have. Anyway, I asked her, and she didn't really know what it was. She said, I'm sure it's not that, but if you want to be referred to a urologist, then I will. So I went to see a private urologist. In fact, I remember the appointment well. I went with my son. He was only 6 then, or 7. And he also dipped my urine and said, well, there's nothing in it. And then he literally tore a piece of paper from his desk and wrote the words interstitial cystitis on it. And he passed it across the desk and said, you may have this. Here is a diet sheet. So you could try changing your diet. And some of my patients do well on a supplement called quercetin. So you could try taking some of that. And he sent me away. Needless to say, I left his office. I'd probably been in there about 10 minutes, and that cost me about £250. And I didn't really have much faith in that. So off I went. And then I spent a year suffering by myself, not really knowing what to do. So I changed my diet. I went and did all the holistic things. So I had some pelvic floor therapy. I looked up supplements. That's when I found the Desert Harvest aloe vera. That helped a little. I had acupuncture, and as things got worse, I ended up then with another urologist who did a cystoscopy. And he then showed that I had bladder inflammation. I mean, that was never going to be a surprise.
Right.
And an infection. He also, the only thing he did do that was really useful was to diagnose me with a histamine intolerance. So I took out the histamine foods in my diet, and that definitely helped. He also put me on something called ranitidine. I think you call it Zantac. For a while, and that helped a little bit with the inflammation, but we again hadn't really got rid of the infection, I think, was the real problem. So I ended up with somebody called Professor Malone-lee, who you who you may have heard of here. And his philosophy or protocol is that it is an embedded infection that keeps reoccurring. And so his treatment is to put you on high-dose long-term antibiotics. That worked for a while, which was a great relief. It worked for sort of about 4 months, I think, initially. And then the flares began to come back, and he just told me to up the dose. It wasn't really working. Eventually, one of his colleagues who I saw said maybe there is some resistance here, but so we switched antibiotics. We played around with that for a few months, off and on, some success, some not. And what Professor Malone doesn't do is do any cultures. So his thinking is that even if you culture a particular bacteria, that there's no guarantee that that's going to be the causative agent. That's the cause of your problem. So he rather just treats it with antibiotics and to see what happens. I decided I wasn't happy with that, and that there had to be something in a more targeted approach. So I went and had some cultures done. They came back with a particular bacteria. Now I've had 4 done now, 2 here in the UK and 2 via Microgen in the US.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah,
and they all come back with the same. They all came back with the same one. So that's when. So I'm still with my clinic here, Professor Malone-Lee's clinic. They're doing their best to take care of me. In that time of also since June, I spoke with somebody called Dr. Deanna Berman, who is just outside New York. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Berman. She is a naturopathic doctor.
Yes.
And she only treats mostly patients with IC and PBS. So I guess what she did for me was the Microgen testing. And not only did she test the urine, but she did a vaginal swab as well, which nobody had done here.
Okay.
And that showed that I had a huge amount of different types of bacteria in my vagina, which she then treated, and a lot of my symptoms improved. So nobody had tested me here for BV, and it could be that the BV was chronic alongside the UTI. So that improved slightly. She also put me on a different antibiotic regime, which seemed to help. And actually from kind of July to June to September, I probably had the most relief I've ever had in 5 years.
That's incredible.
So I've convinced my clinic here, they're allowing me to use this antibiotic that she put me on as in kind of acute flares. So I have it now. My disappointment is that the effects or the relief sadly isn't lasting that long.
Right.
So I might get like a month maybe.
Yeah. And you're still not quite solving the problem. It's not going away.
No.
And that's what's frustrating.
Yes, absolutely. I think part of the problem here in the UK is that we have, there are a number of things that come together to make it very difficult to treat something like this. One is that our frontline services, so I don't know what do you call a general practitioner? So the first person you would go to in the US?
Yeah.
Do you call them your GP?
General practitioner, your family doctor.
Yeah. So our frontline services don't know very much about this condition.
Right.
And you can combine that with the lack of effectiveness in our UTI testing in the surgery. And that then brings you to a whole host of people with misdiagnosis. And then when you go back, when something becomes chronic, they don't really know what to do, because chronic infections or any kind of chronic condition is complicated. And they don't do complicated medicine. They do what we call a treat and street culture, whereby they look for a Band-Aid, which might be antibiotics, it might be antidepressants, it might be heavy duty painkillers, and they want you to just take those and go away. Or they refer you to a urologist, which unfortunately here might take 9 months, might take longer if you're doing it via the NHS and not privately. So in which case then the condition, then you get the vicious cycle of the chronic inflammation. And so I think that's how a lot of the patients in the UK end up the way that they do.
Well, I think that it is similar in the United States. Our doctors are still practicing, things are changing, but they're still practicing in the sense of crisis care. So if there is an infection, the bacterial revolution is still very prevalent right now. And we need to change that to a more natural approach to really understand these chronic illnesses, because they may be caused from an initial bacterial infection, but there's a weakness and there's a disconnect in the way that our, entire energy and our organs are responding to one another. And the way that doctors really kind of go about caring is they really just pinpoint one organ. So if you're going to go to a urologist, they're only going to focus on your bladder. They may focus a little bit on your kidneys. If you're a female, they may, get in a little bit into your vagina or, a little bit more urethral symptoms. But that's about it. They don't think about that, maybe your gut has something to do with this, or maybe your brain, maybe it's a mental thing, So it is very similar. I think that the United States, we're becoming a lot more open to the alternative medicine approach and kind of thinking more collectively about our bodies. I mean, they're one whole thing.
Yes.
So you would think that we would think about it in that sense, but we don't. And I think a lot of your frustration right now is the same as my frustration with, just the lack of understanding and just always being in that crisis care type of emergency bacterial, you need penicillin, we got penicillin, but it's like, it's not always the case.
And for us here, many of the, what I would say, wraparound treatment or looking into root causes, such as you've just mentioned with gut health, that's not recognized. So you can't have a comprehensive stool test unless you pay for one here. And even when you do, which I've paid hundreds of pounds for them. When you present the findings to your urologist, they just dismiss it.
Right.
And that, as you say, I mean, one would hope that they would become more open to these suggestions, and particularly with urologists, with any kind of UTI, because essentially your bladder is an extension of your gut. And I feel there has to be some kind of connection there. And when I last spoke to my urologist, she said to me, our long-term high-dose antibiotic protocol works for 80% of our patients, but for 20% it doesn't. And I happen to be one of those 20%. So that's disappointing. But then that's where it ends, because they're yet to understand, as you've just said, to look at more widely what else is going on here, because I think it has to be to do with our microbiome. Mm-hmm. Why does a person next to me live happily with Enterococcus in their bladder, but for me, I don't?
Right.
So I think there has to be a reason for that. And until we start looking into that, I don't see where they're going to come up with a new alternative.
No, for sure. I definitely agree with you there. And, talking about your gut, our gut is our second brain. So if our bladder is a lot like our gut, our bladder is a lot like our brain. Mm-hmm. So, having any sort of imbalance, whether it is potentially dangerous, that it is a type of bacteria and there is a true infection, there's certain situations where I think antibiotics are great. Of course, if I have a sinus infection, mm-hmm. yes, 100%, sign me up. I need that Z-Pack immediately. Yeah. Or if I truly have, a UTI with E. coli or staph or any other type of bacteria in there, for sure, but that's where I think the whole embedded UTI becomes a very difficult approach, because being on antibiotics long term, I think really only progresses that dysbiosis of your gut. Yeah. So all that good bacteria is now being destroyed. So yes, it's so hard, because I think it's great. And I think it's kind of a breakthrough approach to really look at it as an embedded UTI, which is not widely recognized in the United States. I brought it up to 2 urologists, and they actually looked at me like, what are you talking about? Oh, really? Okay. They're like, can you define that for me? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not the doctor. Yeah, that's worrying. It is kind of interesting, but to really put someone on a long course of antibiotics, it's, we're getting there, but I don't think that's the ultimate solution. No, I think when you look at an embedded UTI very simply, so you look at the etiology of it, where the cycle just keeps coming round, then I guess what they're saying is, so long as you keep a constant amount of antibiotics in you, then hopefully every time it resurfaces, we get rid of it. Right. So I can see why they're doing it, but equally, as you've just said, what it does is on the flip side is then upset the balance in the rest of your body, and gives you no chance naturally to be able to deal with this. And I think that's where we're missing something. Yeah. And it really comes down to the research. The research needs to be done, because it's a very delicate illness to deal with. It definitely has its double-edged sword. You take one thing, it's going to cause another thing. You even mentioned taking quercetin. Well, that's great. And it really helps with even histamine response, allergies, things like that. But it can also lower your blood sugar. So if you're already prone to that, now you might be dealing with dizziness, low blood pressure, all these things. So it's a constant cycle. It's frustrating. Wow. Yeah. So it kind of brings me into, how has IC affected your life? So whether that's positively or negatively, of course, I think a lot of us have more negative things to say about it, but let's kind of dive into a few key areas. So I want to know, how has it affected your relationships? Whether that's intimate, family, friends, work, your boss, anything like that. How has that affected that? Your overall mental health, and then what kind of financial burden has this been on you? When we talk about supplements and we talk about purchasing these tests and treatments. So kind of break it down. We'll start with relationships. How has this affected your relationships? Well, let's start with my husband first, who I'm so grateful and so lucky that he's been incredibly supportive and understanding. Because obviously, the obvious thing, Lauren, is that it affects the intimacy in your relationship hugely. And he's been very patient with that, but it's been more of a problem for me maybe than it has been for him. I feel guilty about, not being able to have sex as often as he would want. A lot of the time, and of course there's it becomes a fear as well, because quite often if you do that, then there's repercussions. I end up with pain for days.
That's really difficult. But he's been great about that. And socially, wider with my friends and my family, initially it was incredibly difficult because it's that age-old thing with a chronic infection that, on the outside, you look normal. You look like you have nothing wrong with you. But then when you sit at the dinner table or you go out to the restaurant and you start saying, well, can I have that but without that? And, is it possible to have this without the pepper on it? And can I, and they're looking at you as if you just grew out from the ground. They don't believe. They start and think, oh, my goodness, what's wrong with her? She's got some strange thing going on mentally. Why is she suddenly, paranoid about everything she's eating? But they don't, they haven't had an icy diet flare, food flare, which is really real and painful and really horrible. So you get paranoid about everything you're putting in your mouth that you haven't prepared yourself. So socially, I became I definitely didn't go out as much. And I tried to control the situation more. I would have people over to dinner to us rather than going out. Even now, years later, my great friends that I go and see, I take my own food with me. I'm always, because I'm really conscious that they shouldn't have to make me something different to everyone else. So I end up with a bag full of plastic boxes with all my food in. But they've kind of got used to that now. But that's awful because it really does change your social life hugely. And I stopped drinking also because obviously alcohol is a no-no.
Yeah.
And to begin with, people found that sort of strange as well. I mean, they're much more accepting of it now, but, and you get that whole sort of, you go out for dinner and by 10 o'clock, you've lost the will to live because everyone else is drunk and talking rubbish and you just want to go home and you end up thinking, my God, they're going to think I'm the I've turned into this boring, recluse that does nothing but focus on her health. It was really, really awkward, I suppose is the best word for that. And certainly it took a while for my family to understand, how bad it was, I think. Mentally, I have my mindfulness practice, which has really helped. So that's a positive. But equally, there have been times moving on to mental health where it has been really, dark. There've been some really dark moments, times when I have lay in bed, in agony and thinking, my God, would it just be simpler to, go to sleep and not wake up, which is, it's a huge admission. But when you're in those moments where it's hard to see the positives, that's what it feels like. It feels like, nobody understands how bad this is. And I'm super good at, getting up and putting a brave face on it and seeing the positives. And I do my, my gratitude practice and looking at all those important things, what are the important things in my life? Let's focus on those, my relationships, my loving family, my friends, to try and get me sort of mentally into a better place. But sometimes I do have moments where I get quite tearful and frustrated that, you're almost grieving for a life that you've lost. Is the best way to put it.
That is really, truly the best way to put it. And I can relate with you 100%.
Yeah.
Even being in so-called remission, which it's not even quite remission, there's, you have your good days, you have your bad days. Especially this last year, being in a pandemic, being isolated and actually being grateful that our whole country is isolated, because for the first time I feel normal. I feel like everyone can relate, but then you get into these dark, times and these thoughts, and it really kind of overtakes you. And I can totally agree. There's been many times where I'm like, it'd just be easier if I just didn't wake up. And it's sad. And then it makes me sad.
It is really sad.
And I'm like, why am I thinking this way? I can get through this. So I think that's really great, though, with your mindfulness and gratitude practice.
Yeah, it's really, I think actually if I hadn't had my mindfulness practice, I'm not sure that I would be in such a good space.
Yeah.
It's funny how these things turn out, isn't it? But I have. It's really helped. It really has helped me through some difficult times, and my family. Actually, my son and my husband, and the love and the compassion that they show daily with this has also been a huge support to me. So, I couldn't be more grateful for that. And actually, funnily enough, working with children, I don't know if you've ever worked with children, but it's as you said, it's incredibly rewarding and it's very giving. And they've also kept me going through this, which is, my sense of having a meaningful life and my sense of purpose every day, being with these children who really need my help and support to navigate their difficult times has also really helped. So that's a positive too.
Yeah. Children, they don't know what you're going through.
No.
They're just mentally, they haven't been developed to that level yet to really understand that maybe you're sick or you're not feeling well or you're having a bad day or you're depressed.
Yeah.
They don't know that. And so, but they still look at you and you're their hero. They want to look up to you and it makes you feel better. You're like, I can be a role model for somebody and they have no idea what I'm going through. It's kind of like having a clean slate. So that's pretty incredible too. So you've had, quite a few positive things that you've found and have come through having this.
Yeah. Financially is huge. I mean, I'm sure you're the same, Lauren. The amount of money I have spent on and still do on supplements. I read another book or another blog or another something or other, and they say, try this. And so, I go straight onto Amazon and hit the pay now button and, another bottle of something comes through the door and, I line them up in the morning. It's quite funny because my husband calls them my box of mumbo jumbo. So I have like a box with all these supplements in, and I wake up in the morning and I think, well, which ones shall I try today? And we line them all up and put them in. And then, of course, on top of the testing is so expensive. I've spent thousands, literally thousands on stool tests and urine tests and gut tests, blood tests, histamine tests. You name it, we've tried it.
It's definitely frustrating because what that really also goes back to is the lack of research, the lack of quality care. We don't know the direction we're supposed to go in. So we read things, we, check out blogs like you mentioned, and we're like, okay, we should be trying aloe supplements. I should be drinking marshmallow tea. I should be, taking my turmeric, but I can't have turmeric with black pepper because that makes me flare. So, and I'm the same way. I have Amazon Prime. I'm honestly ordering something every week, almost every day it feels like, and I have a whole cabinet just full of different supplements, tinctures, teas, and then I worry because I'm like, maybe I shouldn't be taking all of these things. Maybe they're causing me more harm, and you just don't have the right guidance. So it's kind of all about being your own advocate, and it's not easy to be your own advocate.
Yes.
When you don't feel good, when you have a lack of energy, when you're in pain, and you're already kind of having these, depressing thoughts. So you don't know where to go from there. But kind of going off of that, what other types of remedies or therapies, maybe on a more natural sense, that have actually worked for you?
Oh my goodness, I'd love to give you a whole list of those so that I could just provide relief for all the people that are listening today. But I tried pelvic floor therapy and I have a good women's health physio. Did I get some relief from that? Maybe not huge amounts. The Desert Harvest aloe vera is great. If I'm having a flare and I take that, it really helps to ease the pain. So it's quite expensive. But you can now order it here, and that is definitely a go-to, as is something called pre-leaf. That's also great for flares too. I very occasionally take an anti-inflammatory, but not that often. It would have to be really bad for me to do that.
Right, yeah.
And what else have I done? I'm trying to think, what else have I... homeopathy. So the homeopathy is helped in that she's trying to balance my hormones, because I don't know about you, but they think that hormones could play a part in the fluctuation of the symptoms. I don't know. Have you found that?
Yeah, I just more recently, of course, reading my blogs and my my articles, But when I brought it up to my primary care physician, she basically said, I can test you for hormones, but then they're going to want to put you on hormone replacement, and that's going to cause more issues. So I actually just kind of opted out. I know that when I was younger, I got tested and I had actually higher levels of testosterone, which I'm like, what? But it didn't really do a whole lot for me. It just made me like sweat excessively. And of course, when I was like a teenager, that was embarrassing. So they put me on birth control back then. And I got off of that, you know, after a year. I hated that. So that's kind of how my primary care, she sort of reiterated that they're going to want to just put you on birth control. It's going to be a situation like that. But I think that there's a lot of, you know, more naturopathic doctors that are believing in the whole hormone imbalance. And so there is more of a natural alternative route to kind of go with that rather than the Western medicine approach, which is, okay, we're going to put you on hormone replacement. And maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe there's a more dietary, supplement, natural, herbal approach to balancing your hormones, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I've had both. So my clinic here have said exactly that. Why don't we try birth control for 3 months, see if the symptoms are better, use it like a, just to kind of try it and see. And my homeopath is very much, you know, but if you do that, then we're going to get another imbalance. And we don't know what that's going to do. So she is trying to use homeopathy to balance my hormones, because having spent 17 years on birth control, I came off it when the bladder symptoms started to see if it would help. I still have a high amount of estrogen dominance. And I think that could be playing a part too. I know that during ovulation, when my estrogen is really high, my bladder symptoms are always worse.
Yeah, I same way. I get all that just burning inside of my bladder. Like it just feels like my bladder's on fire when I'm ovulating, and then about I would say 24 to 48 hours before my period actually starts, I know that it's going to start soon because it's just on fire. I'm like, So
that's good. That's good to hear, because mine's exactly the same. And sometimes with these chronic illnesses, you know, it's really nice to hear someone else say that, so that you can actually say, me too. You know, it's that me too moment of, oh my God, I'm not on my own here.
For sure.
You know, someone else gets this. I'm not going completely crazy. I'm not, you know, mentally ill. Because I mean, a lot of my doctors have also said that I should try antidepressants. And I haven't wanted to do. I took one, and I think I'm so sensitive to medication that I basically wanted to sleep for a week. So I didn't take any more of those. And it didn't sit right with me. You know, I'm not depressed. You know, something is causing me to feel down, but I didn't feel like it was an imbalance in my, you know, in those chemicals.
That was actually my first form of treatment beyond the regular antibiotic situation that I went through for 4 years. But after I got my diagnosis, I was put on amitriptyline. And that caused me paranoia, lightheadedness. I mean, it just got to like these weird levels of, I was just inside my head, and I'm like, I feel very strange. I feel very sleepy all the time. And so, you know, I think IC already causes me to feel kind of lightheaded and dizzy a lot anyway. So, and I've lost a lot of weight. And so to be on that medication was just causing me a slew of more issues. So I actually got off of that in September, and it was the first time that I felt bladder pain again since February. And so it was upsetting, but I really upped my herbal intake and remedies. And now it's just, I really only feel it with ovulating or my period. So interesting. But yeah, that's definitely like a number one approach is prescribing those, or like Elavelle, or there's another one out there that's terrible. I'm like, the side effects are just awful.
I think, I mean, clearly there's a physiological reason for them prescribing it, that it would help with the pain. But again, the frustration is that nobody wants to deal with the root cause.
Right. Absolutely.
And also, I think different people are comfortable taking different things. Some people, I have friends that will take every pill you give them and not worry about it, whereas I don't like doing that. And I think then sometimes you have another problem because you have a mental problem of, I don't really want to take these antibiotics or a heap load of, antidepressants and all these things. I remember a healer, I have a healer here, and she said to me when she was doing a treatment one day, Suzy, I think you need to start and listen to yourself.
Yeah.
You've been bombarded by so many different people telling you to do all these things. And she said, maybe it's time to sit by yourself with your mindfulness practice and see what comes up for you. What do you want to do about it? What feels right? Because I think you do get to that stage in your desperation where you'll just kind of listen and try anything.
Yeah. And then you just really have to take a step back and see what was working for you, what has created more issues. I always say that, we have to be our own advocates. That's always what I'm telling everyone. And it sucks. It definitely sucks, because you want to trust somebody that has the background, that has the medical experience and the education to guide you. I mean, we're taught that from the age of being a little kid, going to our pediatrician on a regular basis. The doctor is here to help you. But when you get older and you get a chronic illness and there's no one there to help you, it's very scary. Yeah, it is really scary because we don't know what we're doing. But then when you go to the clinic and you get told that, you're in this, as I was, you're in this 20% where we don't really know what to do with you. Where does that leave you? It leaves you going back to in my case, my box of mumbo jumbo and taking some more supplements and hoping that it helps. And now I have these antibiotics that are helping slightly. But I suppose coming to your last point of what would I tell others that are listening and are feeling in a similar way? I think the first thing is not to accept that there's nothing that can be done. I think when I certainly first started on my journey, everything I read about IC was that there is no cure. You'll just have to live with it and manage it. And, and that's hard mentally. But I would say, don't do that. Be curious about your disease, or as I call it, your lack of ease. Be curious about that and ask questions. And know that you are completely unique. I think, we are unique. Our DNA makes sure of that. And every person responds differently to the environmental factors. That there can't, because this is a complicated disease, there can't be a one-size-fits-all treatment. And encouraging that sense of inquiry with our physicians, of going out there and looking for other things, like investigating the microbiome and looking at our gut health, and could there be something there that is behind that's supporting this chronic infection? Maybe there is. So so I would say go and ask questions and don't accept that it's okay to live that way. Absolutely. I think that's really important. Be curious. I just want to remind our listeners that season 1 of my other series called IC in the Dark, I go through a lot of different approaches, types of care, types of treatment. Some of them are, Western medicine and more conventional, and some are unconventional and more alternative. So if you're lost and you need somewhere to start, there's 12 episodes of different things you can do, from fitness to what types of doctors you should be looking for to supplementation and herbal remedies. So definitely check that out. Suzy, I just really want to thank you for your time. Your story, kind of similar to what I went through and to what I think a lot of people who have IC and painful bladder syndrome go through. So I think this will really help other people to feel like they're part of a community, that somebody else is going through what they're going through. So again, I just really appreciate you sharing up some advice and those personal details about your journey.
No, it's been a real pleasure. And I'm a big believer in raising awareness in these things, because I think it's the only way, like with so many things, it's the only way to get people thinking about it and doing something different, is for people to actually know about it. And I think, it's growing here in the UK in terms of, sadly, more people are being affected by it. So hopefully the knock-on effect of that is that somebody will want to look into it further and try and improve the care that we have here and improve the outcomes.
That's the whole purpose and passion behind creating this podcast.
Oh, well, You've done a wonderful thing. You've done a wonderful thing. You know, and I hope a lot more people like me come on and talk. And I look forward very much to listening to all those people, even if it's just that lovely sense of community and realizing that you're not alone and there are other people out there suffering like you are and still trying to get on with their, you know, day-to-day demanding lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. At the basis, this is meant to create community. So again, you know, I really appreciate your time today. It's been a
pleasure.
Great conversation.
Thank you very much for having me, and take care of yourself. I hope you continue to feel good.
Yes, that's the key. So yeah, and you as well. So thank you. And I also want to thank our audience for taking the time to listen to the Bladder Battle Podcast special series, Flarey Tales. So make sure to subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, or leave a rating or review on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts. And stay tuned for the next episode right here on the Bladder Battle Podcast.